There's a particular kind of silence that settles into a home when you realize you're no longer seen as a daughter, but as a solution to someone else's problem. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a heavy, expectant stillness, thick with the weight of unspoken obligations. That silence had been my unwelcome companion for weeks, ever since the Sunday dinner that fractured the landscape of my life. My name is Eleanor, and for all of my 62 years, I had tried to be the good daughter, the steady hand, the quiet port in my family's perpetual storm. My little cottage, nestled in a forgotten lane on the outskirts of Oak Haven, was the one thing I had built for myself. It was my sanctuary, bought not with inherited wealth, but with the sweat of 40 years spent as a local librarian, with quiet overtime and holidays foregone. Every rosebush in the garden, every worn patch on the armchair by the fire, every book on every shelf was a testament to a life lived with careful intention. The dinner had started like any other. My parents, Arthur and Margaret, now stooped and frail in their late 80s, sat at my small oak table. My younger brother, Thomas, was there with them, his presence filling the room with a nervous energy that always set my teeth on edge. He was the golden one, the boy who had never quite grown up, his life a series of grand plans and spectacular failures, each one cushioned by our parents' dwindling savings. I served the roast, the potatoes browned just the way my father liked them, the gravy smooth and rich. The conversation was stilted, a dance around the real reason for their visit. I could feel it, a low hum of anxiety beneath their small talk about the weather and their aching joints. Finally, as I cleared the plates, my mother placed a trembling hand on my arm. Her eyes, cloudy with age, avoided mine. "Eleanor, dear," she began, her voice thin as parchment. "We need to talk about something important." My father cleared his throat, taking over as he always did. "It's about Thomas," he said, his tone one of grave pronouncement. "He's in a bit of a bind again. The business, it didn't work out. He and his family are going to lose their house." I felt a familiar weariness wash over me. Thomas was always in a bind. His life was a tapestry woven from financial crises. I braced myself for the inevitable request for a loan, a sum I couldn't afford, but would be guilted into giving anyway. But what came next was not a request for money. It was a demand for my entire world. "You have this lovely home, Eleanor," my mother continued, her grip tightening. "It's really too big for just one person. You don't need all this space." "What are you suggesting, Mum?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though a cold dread was already coiling in my stomach. It was Thomas who finally said it, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Eleanor, Dad and Mum we all think, it would be for the best if you signed the house over to me. I have children, a wife. I need the stability. You're resourceful. You'll be fine. You can find a small flat somewhere." The silence that followed was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like hammer blows against my heart. I looked from my brother's entitled face to my parents' pleading eyes. They weren't asking. They were telling. They had discussed it, decided it, and were now presenting their verdict. In their minds, my life, my security, my 40 years of hard work were a resource to be allocated to their more pressing concern, their failing son. My home was not my sanctuary. It was a lifeboat for Thomas, and I was being ordered to abandon it. "This house, this is my home," I stammered, the words feeling foolish and small in the face of their unified decision. "I worked my whole life for this. And we are proud of you for that, dear," my father said, as if that settled the matter. "But family helps family. Thomas is on the brink. This is the only way. It's your duty." Duty. That word had been the cornerstone of my existence. It was my duty to stay home and care for them when I'd had a scholarship to a university far away. It was my duty to give Thomas my savings for his first business venture, money I never saw again. It was my duty to be the quiet, stable one, the one who never caused a fuss, the one who could be relied upon and, ultimately, taken for granted. And now, my final duty was to erase myself, to hand over the very foundation of my life so that my brother could continue to fail without consequence. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and shameful. I felt a lifetime of quiet resentments, of swallowed words and patient sacrifices, rise up like bile in my throat. But looking at their expectant faces, I couldn't find the strength to scream. The habit of a lifetime of being the good daughter was too deeply ingrained. All I could manage was a choked sob and a nod. I'll have to see a solicitor, I mumbled, to get the paperwork done. A wave of relief washed over their faces. My mother patted my hand, smiling. "That's our good girl," she said. "We knew you'd understand. You always do what's right." But as they left, bundling a triumphant Thomas out of the door, I didn't feel like a good girl. I felt like a fool. I stood in the center of my living room, the scent of the roast dinner now cloying and sour. I looked at the walls that had held my joys and my sorrows, the garden that was my pride, and I felt a grief so profound it was as if the house had already been sold. I was 62 years old, and I was about to become homeless, ordered out of my own life by the very people I had dedicated it to. The appointment with the lawyer felt like a formality, the final nail in the coffin of my independence. I had no fight left in me. I was just going to sign it all away. The days that followed that dreadful Sunday dinner were lived in a haze of sorrow. Sleep offered little escape, my nights filled with anxious dreams of packing boxes and wandering through unfamiliar, hostile streets. During the day, every object in my home seemed to cry out to me. The chipped porcelain teapot I'd found at a flea market, the heavy velvet curtains I'd saved for a year to buy, the worn wooden floorboards that creaked in a familiar rhythm under my feet. These weren't just things, they were the accumulated artifacts of my life, the physical proof of my existence. The thought of Thomas's careless children scuffing these floors, of his perpetually dissatisfied wife complaining about the old-fashioned kitchen, was a special kind of torture. I spent hours just sitting in my garden, my hands idle for the first time in years. I knew the name of every flower, every herb. I had planted the weeping willow when it was just a sapling, and now its branches swept the ground, a curtain of green that had shaded me on countless summer afternoons. It felt like I was memorizing it all, trying to burn the image of my small paradise into my mind before it was taken from me. Memories, unbidden and sharp, rose to the surface. I remembered being 12, my bicycle, my most prized possession, being borrowed by Thomas and returned with a buckled wheel. My father had simply clapped him on the back and said, "Boys will be boys," before telling me I should be more careful with my things. I remembered being 18, the acceptance letter from the university in my trembling hand, a gateway to a life of literature and learning. My mother had wept, not with joy, but with fear. "Who will look after us if you go so far away? Eleanor, your place is here." And so I stayed. I remembered every loan to Thomas over the years. The £500 for a down payment on a car he crashed a month later. The $2,000 for a surefire stock market tip. The $10,000 to launch a boutique coffee shop that closed in 6 months. Each time, my parents would act as intermediaries, their voices laced with guilt and pressure. "He'll pay you back, Eleanor. He just needs a little help to get on his feet." He never got on his feet, and he never paid me back. I was the family's secret, silent bank, one that never charged interest and never expected repayment. And I had allowed it because I craved their approval, a crumb of the unconditional love they showered so freely on my brother. With a heart as heavy as a river stone, I finally made the call. The solicitor, Mr. Alastair Davies, was an old-fashioned man with an office on the high street, above a bakery. The scent of warm bread hung in the stairwell as I climbed the worn steps. His office was exactly as I'd imagined, walls lined with leather-bound books, a large, cluttered desk, and a window that looked out over the town square. It felt like a room from another era, a place where time moved more slowly. Mr. Davies was a kind-looking man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and a gentle, unassuming manner. He listened patiently as I recounted the story, my voice faltering as I laid out my family's demand. I didn't dress it up or try to make my parents sound like monsters. I just told him the plain, sad truth. I was here to arrange the transfer of my property to my brother. I expected him to nod, to express some mild, professional sympathy, and then to get down to the business of the necessary forms. I slid the folder containing the deed and my original mortgage paperwork across the polished surface of his desk. "These are the documents, I believe," I said, my voice hollow. I bought the house outright 25 years ago. The mortgage was paid off 15 years back. He opened the folder and began to read, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was silent for a long time, shuffling through the pages, occasionally letting out a soft hmm. I sat opposite him, my hands clenched in my lap, just wanting the ordeal to be over. I felt exposed and deeply ashamed, as if I were confessing a personal failing rather than a legal transaction. And then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, looked over the top of his spectacles at me, and a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a smile of genuine, unadulterated surprise. Then he let out a short, soft chuckle. It started low, a rumble in his chest, and then grew into a gentle, rolling laugh. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a laugh of pure, incredulous delight. I stared at him, completely bewildered. My eyes filled with fresh tears of humiliation. Was my situation so pathetic, so utterly absurd, that it was laughable? Mr. Davies, I said, my voice trembling with a new kind of pain. I don't see what's funny. This is my life we're talking about. His laughter subsided immediately, and he leaned forward, his expression turning serious, though his eyes still twinkled with a secret mirth. "Forgive me, Mrs. Thorne," he said, calling me by my married name from a brief and unhappy union decades ago, a name I rarely used. "Please forgive me. I am not laughing at you. Not at all. I am laughing at the sheer, beautiful, poetic irony of this situation. I am laughing at the absurdity of your family's request." "I don't understand," I whispered. He tapped a finger on a specific page in the folder. It was the original financing statement from the purchase of the house. "You told me you bought this house with your savings, with 40 years of hard work." "I did," I insisted. "Every penny." "Yes, you did," he agreed. "But not just your savings. You see this initial down payment? It was a significant sum, nearly half the value of the house at the time. You thought that was from your long-term savings account, didn't you?" I nodded, confused. "Yes. I'd been saving since I first started working at the library." "Well," he said, his smile returning, "you were mistaken. Or rather, you were not told the entire truth. The bulk of that down payment did not come from your savings account at the local bank. It came from a trust. A trust that was set up for you, and only you, years before you even thought of buying this cottage." He reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out another, older-looking folder, one tied with a faded blue ribbon. He laid it on the desk next to my paperwork. "I was the junior partner at this firm back then," he explained softly. "I remember when this trust was executed. It was set up by your maternal grandmother, Evelyn. She came to see my senior partner, Mr. Abernathy, a year before she passed away. She was a very astute woman, very clear in her instructions. My grandmother, Evelyn. She had been my true sanctuary as a child. A woman with flour on her apron and wisdom in her eyes. She had passed away when I was in my late 20s, and the loss had been a deep, enduring ache." Mr. Davies untied the ribbon and pulled out a thick, vellum envelope. He slid a letter from it and pushed it gently across the desk toward me. The handwriting was faint but unmistakable. It was my grandmother's. "Your grandmother stipulated," Mr. Davies continued, his voice now gentle as a prayer, "that the funds were to be held until you decided to purchase a property of your own. She specified that your parents were not to be informed of the source of the money. She arranged with the bank to have it transferred to your account as a lump sum when the time came, appearing as though it was simply your matured savings. She wanted it to be a secret foundation. And she left this letter, to be given to you only if the ownership of your home ever came under threat from your family." With trembling hands, I picked up the letter. The paper was soft with age. I could almost smell her, the scent of lavender and old books. I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the world has tried to take from you the one thing I was determined you should have, a place of your own. I have watched you your whole life, my quiet, steady girl. I have seen your light, even when others, blinded by a sun's bluster, have overlooked it. I have seen the sacrifices you make, the dreams you've deferred for the sake of peace. I love your mother, my daughter, but I know her weakness, her need to placate and to manage, especially where Thomas is concerned. I fear they will lean on you until you break. So, I did the one thing I could. I left you this. Not just money, Eleanor, but a foundation. A rock that is yours and yours alone. This house you stand in was bought with my love. It was my way of building a fortress around you, a place they could not touch, a sanctuary where your gentle soul could find rest. Do not let them take it. It is not theirs to ask for. It is not just a house, it is your birthright, a gift from a grandmother who saw you, truly saw you. Stand your ground, my dear girl. Your strength is quieter than your brother's noise, but it is 1,000 times more real. Live your life. Be happy. You've earned it. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a profound, soul-shaking vindication. For 40 years, I had believed my parents' narrative, that I was the plain, dutiful one and my brother was the one who deserved the world. But my grandmother had seen the truth. She had seen my worth. She had reached across the decades to protect me. Mr. Davies' laughter suddenly made perfect sense. He was laughing because my parents and my brother were trying to command me to give away a gift that had been specifically and secretly designed to be untouchable by them. They were demanding the keys to a fortress they didn't even know existed. I looked up at Mr. Davies, the letter clutched to my chest. The weariness that had stooped my shoulders was gone, replaced by a straightness in my spine I hadn't felt in years. The fog of grief and obligation had lifted, and in its place was a clear, cold, beautiful anger. So I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. What you're telling me is that legally and morally, they have absolutely no claim to my home. My dear Mrs. Thorne, he said, his smile warm and genuine. They don't have a leg to stand on. This house is more yours than they could ever possibly imagine. A small, fierce joy ignited within me, a flame I thought had been extinguished long ago. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a fortress, and the siege was about to end. I walked out of Mr. Davies' office and into the afternoon sun a different woman. The air seemed fresher, the colors of the town square more vibrant. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for a lifetime had not just lifted, it had shattered. It was the feeling of a prisoner who, after decades of confinement, discovers the cell door was never locked. My grandmother's letter was tucked safely in my handbag, but I didn't need to touch it to feel its power. Her words were etched onto my heart. A gift from a grandmother who saw you, truly saw you. For so long, I had defined myself by my family's perception of me, Eleanor, the reliable, the sensible, the one who would manage. My identity was built on the foundation of their needs. Now, that foundation had crumbled, revealing an older, stronger one beneath it, a foundation of my grandmother's love and my own unrecognized resilience. The house was no longer just a collection of bricks and mortar I had toiled for, it was a legacy. It was a tangible piece of my grandmother's faith in me. As I walked the familiar route home, I saw my cottage at the end of the lane, its slate roof gleaming in the light. It looked different. It looked prouder, more solid. It was a fortress, just as she had intended. My fortress. The anger I had felt in the solicitor's office had cooled, crystallizing into a calm, unshakable resolve. There would be no more tears, no more quiet acquiescence. The time for being the good, silent daughter was over. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was thin and reedy, laced with an impatience she was trying to disguise as concern. Eleanor, dear, we haven't heard from you. Did you manage to see that solicitor? I did, Mum, I said, my voice even and calm. It seemed to surprise her. She was likely expecting to hear the wavering, tearful voice of her compliant daughter. Oh, good, she said, a note of relief in her tone. So, when can Thomas expect to, get things moving? He's found a moving company that can do it next month. The sheer audacity of it, the presumption, sent a jolt of energy through me. They had already been planning the logistics of my displacement. There's been a change of plan, I said simply. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A change of plan? What do you mean? Is there a problem with the paperwork? No, there's no problem with the paperwork, I replied, walking over to my window and looking out at the climbing roses clinging to the wall. My roses. The plan has changed because I am not giving my house to Thomas. I am not signing anything over. This is my home, and I am staying here. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief and indignation. I could practically hear her mind trying to process this unprecedented act of defiance. Eleanor, what are you saying? We discussed this. It's for the family. It's your duty. My duty is to myself now, I said, the words feeling powerful and true as they left my lips. I think it's best if we all talk in person. Why don't you, Dad, and Thomas come over tomorrow afternoon? Around 3. Before she could argue or demand more answers, I said a polite, "I'll see you then," and hung up the phone. My hand was steady. My heart was not racing. For the first time in my life, I was the one in control. The next day, they arrived precisely at 3. They filed into my living room, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Thomas looked particularly agitated, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. My father stood with his arms crossed, his expression stormy, while my mother wrung her hands in her lap. The atmosphere was thick with tension. I didn't offer them tea. I remained standing, forcing them to look up at me. "Please sit down," I said, my tone polite but firm. "Eleanor, your mother told me what you said on the phone," my father began, his voice booming in the small room. "Let's not have any foolishness. You gave us your word." I gave you a nod while I was in a state of shock and grief. I corrected him gently. I have since had time to think and to look at the facts. And the fact is, this house is not for sale, and it is not a gift to be given. This is about my children. Thomas burst out, his face flushed with anger. Don't you care about your own niece and nephew? They'll have nowhere to live because of your selfishness. Your children's living situation is your responsibility, Thomas, not mine, I said, my gaze unwavering. For years, I have been the family safety net. I have sacrificed my own opportunities and my own savings to cushion you from the consequences of your own choices. That ends today. Selfishness, my father roared. After all we've done for you. That was the moment. The final thread of my old deference snapped. Done for me? I asked, and this time, there was a quiet laugh in my own voice. It was a bitter, knowing sound. Let's talk about what has been done. I stayed home when I should have gone to university. I poured my life savings into Thomas's failed dreams. And I was about to be made homeless in my old age for his sake. Now, let me tell you what someone else did for me. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the envelope containing my grandmother's letter. I took the letter out and held it up. Do you recognize the handwriting, Mum? My mother squinted, then her eyes widened in recognition. It's from Mother. Where did you get that? It was held in trust for me by my solicitor, I explained, my voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the room. It came with a rather substantial trust fund. A fund that my grandmother, Evelyn, set up for me a year before she died. I watched their faces as the reality of my words began to sink in. Confusion warred with dawning horror. She knew, I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word. She saw how I was always expected to be the giver, the fixer. She saw that you, my own parents, loved me, but that you loved the idea of propping up Thomas more. So she took steps to protect me. The down payment for this house, the very foundation of this home you so casually ordered me to give away, did not come from my meager savings alone. It came from her. It was her gift to me and me alone. I began to read from the letter, my voice steady. I have seen the sacrifices you make, the dreams you've deferred for the sake of peace. I fear they will lean on you until you break. So, I did the one thing I could. I left you this. Not just money, Eleanor, but a foundation, a fortress around you, a place they could not touch. I lowered the letter and looked at them. My father's face was ashen. My mother was openly weeping, but her tears seemed to be for herself, for being found out. Thomas just stared at me, his mouth agape, the picture of thwarted entitlement. They hadn't just been asking for my house. They had been trying, unknowingly, to violate my grandmother's dying wish. They had tried to steal a legacy of love. So you see, I said, folding the letter carefully and placing it back on the mantelpiece, a sacred text upon its altar. You are not asking for my sacrifice. You are asking for something that was never yours to even contemplate. You're asking me to betray the one person in this family who truly saw me and protected me. And the answer is no. Not now. Not ever. The discussion is over. For a long moment, nobody moved. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. Thomas was the first to break. With a muttered curse, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. My father, looking suddenly a decade older, simply shook his head and followed him without another word. Only my mother remained, her face buried in her hands. "Eleanor," she sobbed. "I didn't know. We just wanted to help him." "I know," I said, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for her. "But you tried to help him by destroying me. You cannot build one child up by tearing the other one down. It doesn't work that way." She eventually left, a stooped and broken figure. And then, for the second time in my life, a profound silence settled in the house. But this was a different silence. It wasn't the heavy, expectant quiet of obligation. It was a clean, peaceful silence. It was the sound of freedom. The sound of a door closing on a lifetime of pain and a window opening to whatever came next. The break with my family was near total. Thomas never spoke to me again. My parents sent a few stilted, guilty Christmas cards, but the old intimacy, however flawed, was gone forever. There was a period of grieving for the family I wished I'd had, but that sorrow was slowly replaced by a sense of profound peace. I reconnected with old friends from the library. I joined a walking club. I traveled, taking small trips to the seaside towns I'd always dreamed of visiting. I filled my house not with obligations, but with laughter, with friends, and with the quiet joy of a life lived on my own terms. Sometimes, on a summer evening, I sit in my garden under the weeping willow, a cup of tea in my hands, and I think of my grandmother, Evelyn. I didn't just inherit her money, I inherited her strength. My home is more than my sanctuary. It's a monument to being seen, a testament to a love that reached across time to save me. And in the quiet contentment of my own fortress, I finally, truly, came home to myself. There is a particular kind of mourning reserved for the living. It is a quiet, private grief for the people a family might have been, for the love you thought was unconditional, but discovered was transactional. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, my little cottage, my fortress, was filled with this strange, hollow echo. The phone, once a source of constant, low-grade anxiety, fell silent. There were no more Sunday calls from my mother, her voice a careful blend of affection and subtle prodding about Thomas's latest need. There were no more panicked messages from my father about a bill that needed covering. The silence I had once craved now felt vast and uncharted, like a calm sea after a shipwreck. I was safe on my island, but I was utterly alone. In the beginning, I grieved. I grieved for the mother who would choose her son's comfort over her daughter's security. I grieved for the father whose pride was so entangled with his son's non-existent success that he couldn't see the quiet, steady success of his daughter. Most painfully, I grieved for the illusion I had clung to for 62 years, the belief that if I were good enough, quiet enough, and giving enough, I would eventually earn the same fierce, protective love they gave so freely to Thomas. The day I stood up for myself was the day that illusion died, and its death was not painless. It left a phantom ache, a space in my life that had been filled with obligation for so long. I wasn't sure what to put there in its place. My grandmother's letter became my compass in this new, lonely landscape. I kept it on my bedside table and would read it in the early mornings, when the ghosts of my old life felt most present. Her words, "Stand your ground, my dear girl. Your strength is quieter than your brother's noise, but it is 1,000 times more real," were a balm to my soul. She had known this day might come. She had prepared me for it. I was not just acting for myself, I was honoring her faith in me. This thought gave me the courage to face the silence, to begin to furnish the empty spaces in my life with things of my own choosing. It started small. One Tuesday, I walked into town and bought the most ridiculously expensive, exquisitely perfumed candle I had ever seen. My mother would have called it a waste of money. I lit it that evening, and its scent of sandalwood and rose filled my living room, a fragrant act of defiance. The following week, I hired a painter. I had the hallway, which had been a sensible beige for 30 years, painted a deep, dramatic teal. My father would have hated it. I loved it. I would stand in the hall and just breathe it in, the color of the deep ocean, the color of freedom. These were small acts, but they were acts of reclamation. I was no longer curating my home for my family's potential visits or for their approval. I was curating it for my own joy. One afternoon, sorting through a box of old photographs, I found one of me and my former colleague, Beatrice. We were in our 30s, laughing, arms slung around each other at a library Christmas party. Beatrice had been my one true friend at work, a sharp, witty woman who had left Oakhaven years ago after her own messy divorce, seeking a new start in a coastal town a few hours away. We had exchanged Christmas cards for years, our correspondence dwindling to a few lines of well wishes. On impulse, I found her number online. My hand trembled as I dialed, terrified of being rejected, of finding another door closed to me. She answered on the second ring, her voice exactly as I remembered it, a little husky and full of wry amusement. "Eleanor Vance? Well, I'll be. I was just thinking about you the other day. To what do I owe the honor?" The relief was so immense, I started to cry. I told her everything. The Sunday dinner, the demand, the solicitor's laughter, my grandmother's letter, the final, shattering confrontation. She listened without interruption, a skill she had honed over a lifetime of listening to library patrons. When I finished, my voice thick with unshed tears, she was quiet for a moment. "Well," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about bloody time. I spent 20 years telling you that your family was using you as a walking, talking cash machine. I'm just sorry it took you this long to close the account." There was no "I told you so" in her tone, only a deep, resounding affirmation. "What you did wasn't selfish, Eleanor. It was an act of survival. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with all this lovely, terrifying freedom?" Beatrice became my lifeline. We spoke on the phone every few days. She encouraged me to join a local rambling club. My first walk with them was terrifying. I was shy, awkward, convinced I wouldn't fit in. But as we tramped through the muddy fields and sun-dappled woods, sharing flasks of tea and stories, I felt a part of myself I thought long dead begin to stir. These were people my own age, people with their own stories of loss and love, of children and grandchildren, of careers ended and hobbies begun. They weren't interested in what I could do for them, they were just interested in me. I even took my first solo holiday. A week in a small cottage in Cornwall, a place Beatrice recommended. I walked on windswept beaches, the salt spray on my face. I read books for hours without interruption. I ate what I wanted when I wanted. I discovered that I was, in fact, excellent company for myself. I sent a postcard to Beatrice that simply said, "You were right." The silence is starting to sound like a song. Slowly, painstakingly, I was building a new life, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, walk by walk. My fortress was no longer just a place of defense. It was becoming a place of joy, a headquarters for a life that was finally my own. Just as the seasons were turning and the first autumn leaves began to skitter across my lawn, the silence was broken. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was curled up in my armchair with a new book, the scent of the teal hallway, and my expensive candle a comforting presence. The phone rang, and an old, familiar dread clenched in my stomach. The caller ID showed my mother's number. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could let it ring, preserve the peace I had worked so hard to build. But my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "Your strength is quieter, but it is 1,000 times more real." Real strength wasn't about building impenetrable walls. It was about knowing you could open the gate and still be safe. I took a deep breath and answered. "Eleanor." Her voice was a fragile whisper, stripped of its usual manipulative edge. It was the voice of pure fear. "It's your father. He's had a fall. A bad one. We're at the hospital." The world tilted. "Is he all right?" I asked, my own voice tight with a sudden, sharp worry. For all the pain he had caused, he was still my father. "They think he's broken his hip," she sobbed. "He's in so much pain." He was asking for you, Eleanor." The old strings, the ones of duty and daughterly concern, pulled tight. My first instinct was to drop everything, to rush to her side, to be the fixer, the manager, the steady hand she had always relied on. But the woman who had spent a week by the sea, who had laughed with new friends on a windswept hill, held me back. I could be a concerned daughter without being a sacrificial one. "Which hospital, Mum?" I asked, my voice calm and measured. "I'll be there in the morning. I'll drive up after the morning rush hour." There was a slight pause. "In the morning? Can you come now?" The old expectation was there, a ghost in her plea. "No, Mum," I said gently, but with a firmness that was new and unassailable. "It's late, and I'm not in a state to drive that distance safely in the dark. I will be there tomorrow. Call me if there's any change." I hung up before she could argue, my heart pounding, but not with fear. It was pounding with the strange, exhilarating sensation of setting a boundary and holding it. The hospital was a stark, sterile place, smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. I found my mother in a waiting room, looking small and crumpled. She had aged years in the months since I'd last seen her. When she saw me, she rushed forward and clung to me, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I held her, patting her back, the gesture familiar, but my feelings were not. I felt compassion, yes, but it was a clear, clean compassion, not muddied by resentment or obligation. My father was in a ward, looking frail and pale against the white hospital sheets. His usual blustering energy was gone, replaced by a weary vulnerability. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "Ellie," he whispered, using a childhood nickname I hadn't heard in 50 years. "I'm glad you came." I sat with him, holding his hand, talking to the nurses, getting the details of his upcoming surgery. I was competent and calm. I was being the good daughter, but on my own terms. I was there because I chose to be, not because I was ordered to be. Later, while my father was sleeping, my mother and I went to the hospital cafeteria. She picked at a stale sandwich, her eyes downcast. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor," she said quietly. I didn't know who else to call. "Of course I came," I said. She took a shaky breath, and I knew what was coming next. "Things have been so difficult," she began. "With your father's pension being what it is, and Thomas. Oh, Eleanor, it's been a disaster. They lost the rental house. He and Sarah split up. She took the children and went to live with her sister. He's living in a bedsit above a bedding shop. He's lost so much weight. He looks terrible." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, swimming with tears. Here it was. The moment of truth. The final test. "He's hit rock bottom," she whispered. "A little bit of money, Eleanor. Just a loan. Enough to get a proper deposit on a flat to show Sarah he's trying. You have the house, you're secure. Can you find it in your heart to help your brother?" I took a sip of my tepid coffee, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at my mother, this woman who had caused me so much pain, and I did not feel anger. I felt a deep, profound sadness for her, for the trap she was in, a trap of her own making. "Mum," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "I love you. And in his own way, I suppose I still love Dad, and I even love Thomas. But the bank of Eleanor is closed. It's closed forever." Her face crumpled. "But he's your brother. He has nothing. And whose fault is that?" I asked, without heat, a simple question of fact. "I will not set myself on fire to keep him warm. I did that my whole life, and I almost burned to ashes. But I will help. Just not with money." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. "I spent some time at the library yesterday," I said, clicking the pen. "Our old library." I looked up resources. There is a local charity that provides debt counseling and management. There is a housing association that helps people on low income find affordable accommodation. There are government grants for people re-entering the workforce. I will write down all these numbers for you. I will even help you fill out the forms if you like. This is the help he needs, Mum. Not another handout that will be gone in a month. He needs to learn how to stand on his own feet. And you and Dad need to let him." I wrote down the information, explaining what each service did. My mother just stared at the piece of paper as if it were a foreign object. This was not the solution she wanted. She wanted the easy fix, the check that would make the problem go away for a little while, the solution that required no real change from anyone. "I am offering you real help," I said, pushing the paper towards her. "The kind of help that might actually work. It's your choice whether you and Thomas take it." She didn't take the paper. She just shook her head, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. "I don't understand you anymore, Eleanor," she whispered. "I think, for the first time in my life," I replied, standing up, "you are finally beginning to see the real me." I left her there, sitting in the bleak cafeteria with a list of solutions she wasn't ready to accept. As I walked out of the hospital and back into the crisp autumn air, I felt no guilt. I had offered compassion. I had offered practical support. I had offered a way forward. I had not offered myself as a sacrifice. Driving home, I didn't feel the sorrow of the past months. I felt a quiet, solid strength. I had faced the ultimate emotional blackmail, and I had not buckled. I had been tested, and I had passed. When I got back to my cottage, it felt more like a home than ever before. The teal hallway was a welcoming sight. My grandmother's letter sat on the mantelpiece, a silent, proud witness. That evening, I didn't think about my family's troubles. I sat in my garden, which was preparing for its long winter sleep, and I drew up a plan. Not a plan to fix anyone else, but a plan for me. A trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. A pottery class. A project to build a small greenhouse in the spring. The fortress my grandmother had gifted me was secure. But I was no longer a queen hiding behind its walls. I was a woman who had finally learned to walk out of the gates, to explore the world, and to know, with unshakable certainty, that she had a safe, beautiful, and joyful place to come home to. A home that was, and always would be, entirely my own. The winter that followed my father's hospitalization was a time of quiet pruning. Nature itself seemed to mirror the changes in my life, shedding the unnecessary, retreating to a state of stark, honest essence. My relationship with my parents settled into a fragile truce, a landscape altered by the earthquake of my rebellion. I did my duty, but it was a duty redefined. I drove my father to his physiotherapy appointments. I helped my mother with the heavy shopping, but the visits were shorter, bounded by the clear lines of my own life. I would arrive at 10 and leave by 2. I would help with a specific task, and then I would go home. I was no longer an on-call emotional support service. I was a daughter, visiting. The first time I left my father's side to go to my new pottery class, my mother's eyes followed me with a familiar look of reproach. "You're leaving? But your father wanted to watch that afternoon quiz show with you." "Beatrice is meeting me at the community center," I said, pulling on my coat. "I'll see you both on Friday." I did not offer an apology or an excuse. It was a statement of fact. My life now had its own appointments, its own joys, and they were as valid as anyone else's needs. This was the hardest lesson for them to learn, that my time was no longer a blank page on which they could write their own agenda. There was a subtle shift in my father. Recovery was a long, humbling road for a man who had always been so physically commanding. There were days of frustration and pain, and in those quiet moments, when my mother was bustling in the kitchen, he would sometimes just watch me. One afternoon, as I was adjusting his cushions, he caught my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "You're a good woman, Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy. "Strong. Like your grandmother." It wasn't an apology, not in words. But it was an acknowledgement. It was the closest he would ever come to admitting I had been right, and in the quiet of that sick room, it felt like a peace treaty. News of Thomas came in fragmented, sorrowful reports from my mother. He refused to contact the agencies I had found for him, seeing it as charity, a humiliation. He lost the bedsit. For a few desperate weeks, he was sleeping on the sofas of various long-suffering friends. My mother would whisper this to me on the phone, her voice choked with shame, the unspoken plea for me to intervene hanging heavy in the air. Each time, I repeated my mantra, my voice gentle but unyielding. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mum." The offer to help him with the paperwork for proper assistance still stands. It was Beatrice who gave me the perspective I needed. "He has to hit his own bottom, Eleanor," she said one evening over the phone. "You can't do it for him. And your parents can't keep trying to build a new floor for him every time he gets close. You've given him a map to get out of the hole. He has to choose to read it. So I let go. I truly let go. I grieved for the brother I loved as a boy, the one with the scraped knees and the infectious laugh, and I accepted that I could not save the man he had become. I focused on my own hands, on the cold, damp clay spinning on the potter's wheel. There was a profound satisfaction in it, in taking a formless lump and, with pressure and patience, coaxing it into a bowl, a mug, a vase. My first creations were wobbly and thick, but they were mine. I was creating, not just mending. I was building, not just defending. I filled my kitchen shelves with my own imperfect, beautiful pottery. Each piece was a small, earthy trophy of my new life. Spring arrived, and with it, the trip to Italy. I went alone. The thought that would have terrified me a year ago now felt like the ultimate luxury. I stood in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, tears streaming down my face in front of a Botticelli, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of beauty and freedom. I sat at a small cafe in a Tuscan hill town, sipping wine as the sun set, speaking broken Italian with the friendly owner. I wasn't anyone's daughter or anyone's sister. I was just Eleanor, a woman of 63, seeing the world for the first time through her own eyes. I sent postcards home, not just to Beatrice and my friends from the walking club, but one to my parents as well. It was a picture of a beautiful, sun-drenched garden. On the back, I didn't write about my father's health or my mother's worries. I wrote, "The light here is wonderful. Thinking of you both." It was a message from my world to theirs, an offering of peace, not of servitude. Years passed. My life, once a narrow path of duty, had become a wide, rambling garden of its own. The walking club trips grew more ambitious. My pottery went from being a hobby to a small passion. I sold a few pieces at the local summer fete. My friendship with Beatrice was a constant, steady anchor, a testament to the family you choose. My fortress, my cottage, was rarely silent now. It was filled with the chatter of friends, the sound of music, the scent of baking and flowers from my thriving garden. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep one autumn morning. I was with my mother when she found him. I held her as she wept, and my own tears were for the complex, difficult man I had loved, feared, and finally understood. In the raw days that followed, I was her rock. But this time, it was different. I was a rock she could lean on, not a rock she could grind down. It was while we were sorting through my father's papers that we found it. Tucked away in a shoebox full of old receipts was a small, creased photograph. It was of my grandmother Evelyn, standing in front of her own small cottage, a younger version of me standing beside her, holding her hand. On the back, in my father's spidery handwriting, were the words, "Two strong women." Oakhaven, 1968. He had seen it. All this time, buried under the weight of his own disappointments and his blind spot for Thomas, he had seen it. That small photograph was a final, posthumous gift. It was the absolution I never knew I needed. Thomas appeared at the funeral. He was a ghost of the man he had been. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness in his eyes. He was clean and sober, he told me quietly, away from the other mourners. He had a job as a porter in a warehouse. He was living in a small, clean flat provided by a housing association, one of the very ones I had written down for my mother all those years ago. He had finally read the map. "I was a fool, Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I was a selfish fool. I'm sorry. For everything." "I know," I said. And I did. I looked at my brother, this man who had cost me so much, and I felt a flicker of the old, protective love. "It's a long road, Thomas." "I'm walking it," he said, finally meeting my eyes. There was a hint of a new, hard-won strength there. One day at a time. It wasn't a promise of repayment or a grand gesture. It was better. It was the quiet truth. After the funeral, my mother came to stay with me for a few weeks. She was adrift, lost without my father's presence to anchor her. She wandered through my house, touching the things I had bought, the pottery on my shelves, the photos from my travels. One evening, she stood in the doorway of my teal hallway, her hand resting on the vibrant wall. "You're happy here, aren't you?" she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of quiet wonder. "Yes, Mom," I said. "I am." She turned to me, her face a web of wrinkles illuminated by the soft lamplight. "Your grandmother was right," she whispered. "She was always right about you." I was so worried about Thomas, I couldn't see anything else. "I couldn't see you. I'm so sorry, Eleanor." And there it was. The apology I had longed for my entire life. It didn't come with thunder and lightning. It came in a quiet whisper in a teal blue hallway, and it was enough. I went to her and held her, and we cried together. We cried for my father, for the years we had lost to misunderstanding, for the difficult, painful, and ultimately resilient thing that is family. Today, I am 70 years old. My mother lives in a lovely assisted living community just a few miles away. I visit her often, and we talk like old friends. Thomas is still walking his road. He has remarried, a quiet, sensible woman, and I see him at Christmas. There is still a distance between us, the shadow of the past, but it is a peaceful distance, not a hostile one. My cottage remains my sanctuary. But a sanctuary is not a prison. It is a place of peace from which to engage with the world. My grandmother's letter still sits on my mantelpiece, but it is more of an heirloom now than a lifeline. I don't need to read her words to know my own strength. I have lived it. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit in the worn armchair by the fire, a mug of my own making in my hands, and I look around at the life I have built. A life forged in defiance, softened by forgiveness, and filled with a quiet, enduring joy. I think about the lawyer's laughter, that startling, unexpected sound that was the key turning in the lock of my cage. He was not laughing at my pain. He was laughing with the sheer, beautiful, triumphant joy of knowing the truth. The truth that a fortress built on love can never be taken by force. The truth that it is never, ever too late to become the architect of your own happiness. And in the warm, peaceful silence of my own home, my own fortress, my own garden, I am finally, completely at peace.